I was diagnosed with ADHD, in fact, a year ago tomorrow, at the age of 53, and it was a complete surprise to me. When I look back, it's really clear I started to struggle in school. We were launched from Number 10 by David Cameron. It was a national task force to deliver more engagement and raise awareness about how important engagement was in business. So 42 of the top CEOs, again, gave me an opportunity that I just immediately said yes to. I then ended up doing a lot of public speaking and conferencing all over the world.
Alhamdulillah, God gave me everything. Alhamdulillah.
When you make a choice and say, come hell or high water, I'm going to be this, then you should not be surprised when you are that. And I gave my soul to this game. There's nothing more to give.
Everest is obvious to climb because it's there, it's a mountain. Personal Everest, you can't see it. No one can see it but you. Never give up on a dream.
Just look deep within myself and ask myself how much I want it. What am I here for? Don't lose that desire. I want to unleash the beast.
When I sat here in this crowd, US 93, and saw all these guys, I realized it's there. It's there for the taking if I put the time in.
Be true to the game, because the game will be true to you. If you try to shortcut the game, then the game's gonna shortcut you.
Welcome to the Game Podcast, Cathy Brown, the CEO for ISC, as well as 20 years service for BT, from customer service advisor to head of operations, and you were the a director of operations for Engagement for Success, as well as the employee with the Ownership Association.
It is exactly that.
Big
yes.
resume, it's hard to remember. Yeah. So even before we get into your whole story and your whole background, talk to me about being a champion for neurodiversity and how that kind of come about, because I feel like that's really important. And I'd just like to start off on that point.
Yep. So it's a new thing for me. I was diagnosed with ADHD, in fact, a year ago tomorrow, at the age of 53. And it was a complete surprise to me. I'd never realised that a neurodiversity was behind a lot of the challenges that I experienced in the workplace. And as soon as I did realise, I had a full assessment and a diagnosis, I became really passionate about talking about it openly so that people understand what the difficulties are, but also what the strengths are, very much so. And it is really important to me to talk about it, particularly in the workplace.
But for those that don't know, what does neurodiversity actually mean? Like, aside from severe ADHD and all of that, but actual neurodiversity itself, in terms of the overall topic?
Yeah, absolutely. In fact, I heard a great term for it that's slightly unusual. A lot of people now call it neurodifference, and I quite like that. It feels like a better description. And essentially, it's a set of conditions that arise because some people's brains are actually constructed differently. So it is quite literally a brain difference. And that can impact in a number of ways. And it can be things like dyslexia. So that is a neurodifference, as is autism, ADHD, dysgraphia and dyscalculia, which are around your ability to look at numbers and your handwriting, and dyspraxia, which is very much about your physical and fine motor control. And so it's a set of conditions altogether that are generated by the fact that your brain is actually constructed in a different way and therefore reacts in different ways to what we call the neurotypical sort of selection of the population, which is by far in the majority. So more people are neurotypical than are neurodifferent.
So then, in terms of your own, like, what kind of impact did you have when looking back? And when you had that realization, that how did that even come about?
It really had never occurred to me at all that there was something like that going on. And I realised it because I had a friend who was diagnosed, first of all, with autistic spectrum disorder and then with ADHD. And she'd been posting on her Facebook page, and I'd been, supportively liking what she was doing. And I accidentally clicked on a video that she posted because I never normally watch videos. And it just made light bulbs come on for me. What it was described probably my most severe symptom, which is procrastination. So I procrastinate about everything, including things I want to do. And it's not a voluntary thing. So I'm not choosing to procrastinate. I am simply unable to do some of these things. And my brain will forget. If it's so keen to not do that thing, my brain will literally forget it without my conscious sort of volition at all. And so I watched this video and I then read 7 books in a weekend, which is a very ADHD thing to do, as I now realise. And I was reading bits out to my partner and he was going, yes, you do that. And yes, you do that. And it was really clear that I ought to at least get it investigated. I'm very fortunate. I was in a position where I could pay for an assessment, and that's not the case for many, many people. But one of the things about ADHD is you want to do things immediately, now. And I was lucky to be able to do that. So I had an assessment within about 5 or 6 weeks, and the diagnosis was severe combined ADHD. And as I grew to learn more about it, it was really obvious from my teenage years, with a very classic pattern of female ADHD, which looks very different to the idea that people have of ADHD specifically. So we tend to think of the small, energetic, slightly naughty boys when we our picture. That's what our picture of ADHD is.
That was my picture before I even researched what ADHD actually was.
And for women, very different. So as young girls, we're more likely to be what's called inattentive. So we'll be the ones daydreaming, looking out of the window, falling behind a little bit in school because we haven't quite got that focus. And that's the first sign. And it's why women are often missed, because we just don't understand or have enough awareness yet of what the symptoms look like. And you go back to my school reports, age 13, 14, to what they all say. Cathy would be much better if she could pay attention. Cathy is always daydreaming. And it's a really clear point from I'm going to say about 13 onwards, which is fairly normal. And
so, when you first got the actual realization or the inkling that you might actually have the similar symptoms to what your friend was going through, how did that make you feel? Because did that kind of like bring you down in terms of like you felt, or was it relief in terms of like there's actually a meaning and a name to what you actually have?
Huge relief. And it's been a bit of a roller coaster since then, but that initial feeling hasn't ever really gone away. And a lot of people who get to similar age to me and then have a diagnosis have the same feeling. So you have some anger because it's real regret that it wasn't diagnosed earlier,
and you resentment
think, but in the main, all of us live with a feeling that we are somehow wrong. Because we can see that we're not the same as the population around us. People find things really easy to do that I find really difficult. And of course, all you do is you internalize the message all the way through your life that you must be wrong somehow because everybody else can do this.
It's a negative feeling.
And when you suddenly have this explanation for why you found these easy things so hard for so many years, it genuinely is a relief because, you are different. And it is harder for me to do things which most people take completely for granted as being an easy thing. And so, that relief has never really gone away. It's even when I'm feeling cross and resentful about it not being diagnosed much earlier, it's still like, oh, thank heavens it is now.
There's like a yin and yang of it. Yeah, but then, so going back now, let's talk about your actual childhood and your story and how you were kind of shaped to who the person you actually are, like away from the diagnosis. So how was your early childhood like and what were your experiences growing up?
So I grew up in the West Midlands, actually, in Wolverhampton, just outside Wolverhampton. And I've, for most of my life, lived and worked in the Midlands, so very Midlands-based family. And so I'm going to say I'm 54 now. In 1977, my parents divorced. So I was 9. And unusually for the time, because obviously that's quite some years ago now, my parents stayed very friendly. and actually lived within
the same parameter.
Yes, very close to each other. So we saw a lot of my dad, which was quite unusual again at that point. And then when both of them remarried, we were effectively brought up as one family. So we've got quite an interesting family background from that point of view, with stepsisters and half brothers and a full brother, but all of us, in the context of joint family holidays and all sorts of things.
How is it navigating that? Like initially, like if you look back, because 9, 10, 11, I feel like it's not pivotal in terms of like your whole trajectory, but it plays a part. If you look back, how was it? First of all, knowing that they're not together anymore, even though they might be semi-close or have that kind of working relationship, but they're not really a husband and wife. So then how was it navigating that, and also navigating the fact that you got stepbrothers and stepsisters and that whole dynamic?
I was the eldest, so
That makes it harder, because I'm the eldest brother as well, and I know that responsibility.
I still feel to some extent responsible for all of them. And my mum worked, and my dad worked, and my stepdad worked, and my stepmom worked. And so there was a lot of responsibility at the time, but of the sort where you take it for granted. You're a family, you're all doing stuff. If I have to look after one of the baby brothers for a bit, then well, that's fine, because I'm the eldest, and that's what you do. So at the time, you don't really question it. It is that's your world, and that's how your world works. It's only when you look back on it with an adult lens that you start to realise how much some of that has affected the behaviours that you have as an adult, because you've grown up in an environment where those behaviours that's what you've seen, and that's what you've learned as a child. And I think that's the same for any family situation, whether it's like that, a blended family as we call it now, I think, or whether it's the nuclear family of parents that are still together, and you have all of the different combinations that you can have now in terms of people's sexuality and gender that we recognise as a family. So for me, that is just family dynamics, as opposed to being in a particular way because of my specific family. So we're all impacted by our experiences as children growing up. But you personally, because it's a big responsibility, and I feel like that helps you, because I see it with myself as well. I've been the eldest, so I can kind of relate, but obviously mine's just a singular family. But in terms of like the responsibility and learning to kind of lead the ship almost when your parents are not there. And I feel like through yourself, in terms of being a CEO and being in that director level, I feel like you kind of carry that forward. Possibly. I've not actually looked at it in that light before. What I tend to find is that some of those earliest behaviours are about looking after people and making sure they're okay. And I've always been a very people-centric leader, and that, I think, comes from that early experience. I like to make sure that everyone is all right. So there's quite a nurturing element to it in some ways, and I'm sure that's probably all the way back into childhood, of the family unit works better if everybody's happy.
And there's a kind of clear structure of like, if mom and dad's not there, then Cathy's in charge. Or those simple little dynamics.
I'm less bothered about that in a work context, actually. So I quite like a non-hierarchical structure, and that's probably the ADHD, because I deal quite well with chaotic things. In terms of my own health, I'm better if there's some structure, but it's not my natural way to organisation is a big problem for me. I don't it's one of the things that ADHD people do not do well. We don't have a strong organisational ability at all, and so hierarchical structure within an organisation, while for some autistic people that is what they need because they like that structure, for ADHD people we can operate quite fluidly without it, and we tend to see a bigger holistic
picture
piece where people connect in at different levels,
so
as they're needed.
In like your teenage years growing up, because obviously that responsibility at home is a given. Like it doesn't matter what you're doing outside of it, it's always just going to be there. So then how is it navigating that? obviously what you're dealing with in terms of your ADHD, and as you said, like the non-hierarchical kind of complex.
Yeah.
And whereas at home is a clear structure, so then when you're forgetting things or procrastinating here and there, the parents must have been onto you because you're the oldest. You're supposed to set the mantle, if you know what I mean.
Yeah. I see. It was when I look back, it's really clear I started to struggle in school. Before my O-levels, GCSEs as they are now. So the year before, probably, so about 14, 15. And that carried on all the way through both O-levels, A-levels, and into my first year at university. And my parents were both teachers, and my stepmother, two of them in the school that I was at, because it was a small village just outside Wolverhampton. And I think it's a bit of a sort of classic... nobody really paid an awful lot of attention because they thought that my parents would be, because they were teachers. And so nobody was really saying, what's going on here? Her work is really drifting. We know she's cleverer than this. And what was happening was things like, I still do this to this day, revision timetables are a great example of an ADHD person. So great, love to do it, colour-coded, work everything out, great procrastination activity, not actually do any revision. A week later, you've got to redo your timetable to squash it all in because you've got less time and you haven't done any revision. And of course, you do everything at the last minute. And I did still get good results, but obviously not as good as they probably could have been. Got some O-levels, plenty of O-levels, went into sixth form, really enjoyed my sixth form time, had a really great group of friends, but almost got kicked out in the lower sixth because I wasn't doing enough work. So it had really kicked in by that point of just not finding it interesting. Finding boys more interesting, so a big distraction. But I scraped through some A-levels and went to university, and that was such a bad move. And because of the teaching background, none of us had ever considered that I wouldn't go to university. So it was just, I never thought anything else. That was what it was going to be. And
before we get into university, just to cut you off, because I think
fine. I could talk for ages.
No, I think it's an important point because within that you mentioned the fact that you let revision kind of slip and you've done it at the last minute. But I'm kind of the same, and I don't really see myself as having ADHD or anything, but I feel like I'm smart enough to pass it, if you know what I mean. So then I don't revise till the last week or the last 2 weeks, because a month before I'm just thinking, like, my brain just gets into a mode of, you're going to pass that, you're going to do well, so why are you even wasting your time at the moment? So did that play a part with yours, or is it different? Like, just explain to me the dynamic.
It's a really, really good question, because for many of the neurodifferences, when you try and explain what one of the symptoms or conditions is, people will very often say, oh, well, we all procrastinate a bit. We all do that.
I'm not saying
that. No, I know, but it is that piece, because we all do. So many people will operate as you do. You've got a decent sense of your ability. You've got a decent sense of what you've got to do to get a reasonable mark. And you do that, and fine. If it's skewed towards the last minute, then it's fine. You know what you can do. And many people are deadline driven. The difference with something like ADHD is it's beyond even the last minute, and it's all of it, and it's every day, every single. So it's not just I've got this one assignment, it's taking me a bit long. It's absolutely everything, and it means that you have no slack to deal with anything unexpected. So say you're
so you know when you say everything, like, I'm just trying to understand what do you mean by everything. So I can procrastinate about eating. So obviously it's not good for your physical health, because I'm engaged in what I'm doing, and it's like no, well, I'll do that later. There's a concept called revenge bedtime procrastination, which is really common for ADHD people. So we put off going to sleep because our brain wants input all the time, and if we're sleeping, our brain doesn't have input, and our brain sees that as boring. And so we put off bedtime again and again and again, and we push it later and later. And of course, that means we don't get the sleep that we need. I will procrastinate about anything that my brain sees as dull. Okay.
And that could be my tax returns, which is obviously not good if you're running a business.
100%,
paying fines. So there was some research recently that says undiagnosed ADHD people probably cost themselves over $1,500 a year more in bills that they forget to pay, fines that they pay too late, impulsive spending, all of that. So it costs us money, because of that procrastination piece.
The drive for like enthusiasm.
I mean, dates for anything will just, and if I've set those dates, they really pass me by. If it's an external deadline, then I've got more chance of doing something. But it will literally be at the 11th hour.
But if you can, talk to me about that feeling. So when you have a task, just so we can gain a bit more understanding, for myself especially, because I'm just trying to learn. But when you say that it's procrastination, and like, explain to me that feeling of when it's like, let's say for example, like coming here today, or even actually, let's take it back, eating cereal in the morning or your breakfast, and you're sitting in bed and you can't get out. Like, is there something that's kind of like holding you in, if you know what I mean? What's that feeling like?
It's deeply frustrating, because you feel like it's not under your control, particularly when it's things that you want to do, and you're just slumped on the sofa scrolling, and it's because your brain is just like, no, that's working for me. It's giving me dopamine, so we're just going to carry on doing that, because we're motivated quite differently to the neurotypical population. So the neurotypical population can look at a task and they can say, it's going to take me approximately this long, and they'll be reasonably accurate. And I don't really want to do it because it's really dull, but I know I have to.
Okay, so is that other thought process you don't have?
Yeah, I don't have that. So that's called being motivated by rewards and consequences. If I do this, I'll get this thing. If I don't do this, this will happen. ADHD people are motivated by interest. So are we actually interested in something, and is it urgent? So we struggle then to prioritise things which should be more important than not, because if we're not interested in them, literally our brain will just not see them. And what it does want is things that are causing that interest. If you get stuck in a Twitter spiral or something, you're feeding your brain little hits of dopamine, and it says, I like this, this is where I'm going to stay. No, you can't get off the sofa to go and do the washing up.
So how do you beat it? I know it's a tough question, but like, because you came on time today, like I was surprised as well, because I walked out the door and you were there. So I was like...
Time is a fascinating thing for ADHD people. So we have this concept called time blindness. And for some people, that will mean they're late for everything. For some people, like me, it actually means that I'm either dead on time or I'm early, because I hate being late.
Yeah, no, that's a great habit.
But it's an effort. It's a work of effort to do that. We also are very, very bad at telling how long things will take us to do. And we double and triple account for our time. So if I've got half an hour in the morning, and I'll be saying, oh, it's fine. No, I've got time to make a cup of tea. Oh, no, it's fine. I've got time to do X. Oh, no, it's fine. I've got time to wash my hair. And of course I haven't. I might have time to do one of those things, but I haven't got time to do all three. But my brain will have put all of them in that half an hour, because I don't have an ability to section it up and say, actually, no, you've got an hour's worth of stuff there. And the other time blindness thing that most of us, not all of us have, but most of us have, is we don't really see time as a linear thing. So we see now, or we see not now. And that's where the urgency thing comes in. So brilliant. If I can do it now and get it done, then it's done. Or if it needs to be done now, then great, I can do it. If it doesn't, it's just nowhere. I don't think to myself, well, that's fine. At 4 o'clock today, I'll be able to do that. It's just gone. So now or not now. So relationship with time is really interesting.
So how do you combat that? So is it that you do a clear structure within the day, or is it that, well, I don't know.
So when I was undiagnosed, and obviously didn't understand why I'd got these various challenges, it used to, in a work context, it used to make me feel really unprofessional, because what would happen is my diary would always be full of clashing meetings, because I'd say yes to something and then not actually go and check to see whether it fitted. And so I was forever having to move things and apologise to people and all of that. And it just, and because you're quite often delivering stuff at the last minute as well, you just have this constant feeling that you're apologising for yourself and that you should be able to manage this better and that this doesn't happen to other people. You're just hopeless. And
all the negative thoughts.
Yeah, very much so. And, again, you can talk to ADHD people and we will tell you, we have tried every app, every planning app, every paper planner you can buy, because we really want to be that organised. But what our brains can't do is put in the structure that makes those things work. So in order to make a paper planner work, you've got to use it every day and you've got to refer to it. And, I might get really excited by it for a couple of days, but I'm not able to build the discipline to use it every day and make it work. So the thing that's now made the difference for me, and again, I consider myself to be really fortunate, is I applied for access to work through the DWP.
Okay.
So if you have a disability, whether it's a neurodifference, whether it's a physical disability, it can be mental health conditions. So there's a broad array of things that fit into this category. You can, and you're either got an interview coming up or you're in work already. You can apply for access to work, and they will do an assessment on the things that you have to do in your workplace, and that's all the way from people like me running a business to self-employed people to people on shop floors and warehouses, and so there's no distinction in terms of the job that you do. And they will assess you then for the type of help that can be provided. Some of that will be equipment, potentially. In my case, it's what's called human support.
Okay.
So I have somebody who does those executive function things that my brain can't do. So I now have somebody who organises my calendar and who sorts out my email and all of those things that I hugely struggle to do because my brain is not wired in the same way. Taya now does for me, and it's paid for through access to work, and it is genuinely life-changing because I no longer feel that I'm on the back foot all the time. She has a really good understanding of where my challenges are, and so she's able to work with me in a really non-judgmental way. So it's not a we're trying to fix you, it's we're trying to give you
Just
the best environment we can for you to be your best. Because I'm creative, I'm spontaneous, I'm original, and if I'm bogged down, desperately trying to put loads of energy and time into managing my diary, I'm not those things.
You waste your talents.
So that's made a huge difference to me.
Yeah. So how does it affect you within your career? So in terms of, as we said, you dropped out of university after I think 2 years.
1 year, actually.
1 year,
so
okay.
Went to university on the back of some slightly weak A-levels to do law. And that was a bit of rebellion from my family because they all wanted me to do English, which was a topic I really enjoyed, but I was just being really rebellious. And it was like, no, I thought law would be interesting. And in fact, again, I look at that in hindsight, law is really dull because it's a lot of memory work. So I have, one of the ADHD things is you have a poor working memory. So I wasn't very good at it.
It was a bad combination.
And it really was. It really was. And so I did a year. I did some resits at the end of that year, which I passed. So I said, right, okay, I'll start my second year. And I went to one lecture and I never went back because it was the wrong place for me completely.
But you know that feeling just before we carry on, because that's a really horrible feeling to have where you're going into lectures and everyone else is kind of like engaging with it and understanding it. And for you, you're not really getting it. So how was that?
It was horrible. This is so many years ago now, and I can still remember feeling ashamed because obviously I was going to have to tell my parents that this wasn't going to work, and feeling ashamed because everybody else was getting it and I wasn't. And my behaviour in that sort of scenario, particularly then, was to withdraw and to avoid it. And so I didn't tell anybody for ages and ages. I just stopped going. So I was at Birmingham University and I spent so much time in the library and a lot of time going to the physics lectures, which were really interesting because nobody stopped me. And it was just, I'll go and do those instead. So I was actually doing second year physics lectures, which is just like, whatever. But in the end, obviously, the university picked up that I wasn't attending anything. And So
But,
they
did you feel lonely at the time?
Yeah,
'Cause
yes,
you never told anyone.
very much so, because I didn't tell any of my family, and we're a close family. And obviously, my roommates had realised that something was up, but I really wasn't talking about it. And it's the first challenge in my adult life that I really remember as being a difficult thing, and not knowing how to deal with it, and feeling very isolated because of that. And eventually, over the Christmas holidays, I obviously told my parents, and we sorted out that all the various logistics, because I came home for a little while, which isn't what anybody wants to do when they've obviously left home. But it was fine, and I worked for my dad looking after my youngest brother, who coincidentally within all of this was diagnosed as profoundly autistic.
Okay.
And so 6 months sort of getting myself back together and paying off my student overdraft because impulsive spending, big ADHD thing. And then a family friend offered me a job back here in Birmingham working on BR&B radio.
Okay.
Which obviously I jumped at, and I had a fantastic 4 years working for BR&B and Extra AM, which was the gold station that was set up at the time.
How did that transition happen? From studying law to actually being a radio presenter?
Well, it was production rather than presentation.
Oh, production, okay.
But I was on air a bit.
But that's a massive change.
A huge change. That 6 months in between where I was looking after my brother, I think was helpful to transition from coming away from the failure of the degree and trying to give myself a bit more confidence again. But
why not feel sorry for yourself? Obviously, there must have been a point where you were and you're going through the emotions, but then how did you come out of it? Because a lot of people go through the same thing where they kind of meet whatever it is. It could be business, entrepreneurship, whatever it is, but they always meet that first resistance and they can't really get over it.
Yep.
So how did you kind of get over the hump?
It's a cracking question, because one of the things that's been said about me in later life is that I don't give up on stuff. I pick myself up and I keep moving because in my head, you have to. You can't just stop. It's not an option. And so even if that's crawling along the ground towards the next thing, I always keep moving. And that's exactly what I did back then.
But why is it an option?
I think I'm naturally optimistic and about moving forward. So it's a way of being. It's not really a choice, as in I choose to do that. That is how I am.
But a lot of people sit across from me, and when I first ask that question, like it's the same question when said in a different way. But they always say you have to. But when you look around,
but it's the how, isn't it? I understand what you mean. And I mean, some of it, I think it probably is the ADHD, because one of the things that we get very motivated by is the new and the unusual and the novel, and because that's interesting. And one of the delights of ADHD is that there's so much in the world, so much about people, so much about technology, so much about society, that there's always something that is going to spark your interest. It's very unusual that there won't, because you're always looking for what the new or exciting thing is. It's just what your brain is craving. So I'm more likely, even if I am down, to see something that's going to bring me out of it and just give me that bit of impetus to change direction or whatever it is.
There's impetus, and then there's going from doing law to being on radio production and presenting.
Law was just so clearly the wrong place.
No, but there's impetus. My question is, like, there's a bit of impetus, and you're on about that reinvigoration and like jumping up again. But then you could become working a shop or working anything. Why make that jump to radio?
Well, because it was offered, and because I say yes. I say yes a lot. You see, I don't say no to things. I say yes.
That's a good trait to have.
And I'm not. I don't tend to think about the risk of things. And so some person might might go, well, that's a really interesting offer, but I know nothing about radio, and I'd be much safer over here doing this thing.
No, thank you.
I go, oh, that sounds fascinating. Yeah, I'll have a go. And that absolutely is.
It's a fearlessness. It's a very good trait to have.
It is. It is indeed.
So then, how did you transpire from there, from radio to BT? So what was the journey like?
Yeah, loved radio. So we were here for 4 years with my then husband, and we'd got a sort of arrangement with each other. So he was working for BT here in Birmingham, and I was doing studio production. And we hadn't got kids at that point. We were pretty free and easy. And the sort of deal between us was whichever one got the decent job first, we'd move wherever that job was. Yeah. So I had an interview for Radio 1, which would have obviously meant us going down to London. And shortly after that, Andy had an interview for a promotion with BT that would have taken us back to Shrewsbury in Shropshire, which is where he was from and where his family were. And I came second at Radio 1. So for those of you who are my age, Diane Oxenbury got my job and worked with Steve Wright. So I would have liked that one. But Andy was successful in getting his promotion. So we up sticks and moved to Shrewsbury. And radio, it would have been WM at that point, WM Radio, was BBC, and they weren't recruiting. So I couldn't get back in to radio. But I looked at what we now call transferable skills, of course, and it was all around communication and all of that stuff. And so I managed to get into BT, in fact, in the same team that my husband was then in, and that was call centre working. So 150, when you ring up and you're moving house and you want to move your phone, or you want to query your phone bill, or whatever else it was. So that was when I joined BT. And that was a conscious, what skills have I learnt that I could bring to this, sort of rather than the very different law to radio piece. So it was a bit more understandable from that point of view. But
also it's still a step, even though you agreed with your then husband to move over depending on whoever got the job. But when you actually have to move over, it's still daunting and still a big experience.
It is.
So then how long was it before you actually got on the bandwagon and started applying for jobs back in Shrewsbury and Shropshire? Or was it like a quick...
It was relatively quick in the end, because they'd taken Andy and they were creating a new call centre. So they were actually looking for lots of stuff. So it worked very well. And I think we moved, and I had about 6 weeks waiting for my course to start. So he'd started, and then I started about 6 weeks later.
What was the learning in that call centre job? Or like, what were the transferable skills that you took down?
I still
'cause I feel like you'd be good at that.
I still use skills that I was taught doing that job. The BT training for it was really good. Not only the technical system that you're using, but how you communicate effectively with customers. And so the questions that you ask to get out of them what it is that they actually need, which may not be what they're saying. So you get quite good at understanding what people are saying between the lines. And
have you got an example of that?
Well, people might ring up and talk about their rental phone, for instance. It was the point at which we still rented phones out. And you'd eventually realise that what they wanted to do was reduce the amount of money that they were spending. So they were looking for ways to do that. And of course, what you then do is you say, fine, you can get rid of the rental phone and just buy one, and we can sell you one, or you can go to a BT phone shop and buy one. However, tell me a little bit about yourself, because you might be eligible for a discount. So we might be able to lower your bill for you. And it's just reading that sort of, okay, this is what they're actually asking me, but what does that really mean underneath? And there are techniques that you teach call centre staff to have those conversations so that you're doing it in such a way that you get to the bottom of whatever it is that customer
without
really
being
wants.
overbearing.
Yes, or patronising, or
it's
anything
about finding
like
that balance.
That. And it is about connecting with people as people and understanding what's going on for them. But even within the context of obviously being monitored for speed and accuracy and all of the rest of it, because you've got hundreds of calls coming in and you need to deal with them. But then the other things that they taught us that, again, I still use are how to diffuse situations where customers are upset or angry, and not take the hook and make things worse. So passive aggressive apologising. Well, I'm sorry that you feel like that, but and there are so much better ways to communicate with people that don't do that. Don't make people more angry. And so it was an incredible training in proper person-to-person communication. And the problem for me, obviously, with ADHD
I was just gonna say.
it was dull.
I thought it would be the opposite. I thought you might get really interested in the people's stories and you won't disconnect from the call.
No, just because you're doing the same thing day in, day out, every minute of every day.
So how long were you there for?
I was actually there for 6 years.
6 years.
But the last 2 of that, we'd set up an admin office to sort of manage the scheduling of the shifts. And so I'd gone up a grade in terms of, I wasn't managing people, but I was just sort of below management. So I got quite a lot of responsibility, which obviously I enjoyed. And I was doing a lot of sort of quite technical stuff with computers and monitoring, and
so
again,
keeping your mind busy.
Yes, exactly.
But how was that 4 years? Before that, why stick at the same job if you find it that dull?
Because there were other things in my life that were going on.
Okay.
And so my husband and I were trying to have a baby, which we were not successful at for a long time. And so we'd got treatment and tests and things going on.
Yeah.
So you have another focus. And
so the other things going on.
Yeah. And so sometimes the fact that you're just coming to a job which is easy and you can walk away from at the end of the day and you haven't got to worry about when you get home is actually really helpful when you've got a bunch of other stuff that's happening in the rest of your life. And so that's why I think it took me so long to make a move. And then at the point at which, I'm going to say 2 years in the admin office with doing calls when it was busy, I was getting really, really restless and obviously still not pregnant or anything else. So I started looking for jobs in the technical side of BT and very quickly got one because, as you can tell, I like to talk about myself. I found a manager that was willing to take a risk on the fact that I learn really quickly. So he pulled me into a job that I knew nothing about at all.
Okay.
And within 2 weeks of that, I got pregnant. So one of the first things I had to do was go and tell him I was going to need maternity leave.
After giving all that talk and now,
Yeah, but he was brilliant. He was one of the best bosses I've ever had in all of my life. He was so supportive and connected to the ADHD. For women, it can be very connected to our hormones. And so getting pregnant really did a bit of a number on my brain in that sense, in a way, in a positive way, because it gives you more of the stuff that you're normally missing. So I actually got more focused, which is something that I don't normally. I'm distracted by all sorts of stuff. So that was quite interesting. But and then my lovely lad was born, and I went back to work relatively quickly because I like being at work. And we were obviously both working for the same company, me and my husband, so that was easy enough to deal with. And then from that point, when I went back, it was like something had clicked in a way, and I had 4 promotions in 4 years. So I was in the IT department by that point, and I just went up and up and up and up and up until I was managing quite a large division for BT.
How did that happen?
Again, slightly that element of fearlessness. So if there was an opportunity, I wouldn't think twice about going for it if I thought it would be interesting. I had built a reputation for myself as somebody who did deliver and who had good ideas, and in that technical world, I was a very good communicator, and quite often I'd be dealing with teams of programmers who are very introverted, and so my ability to talk to an outside audience in business terms rather than technical terms, but then talk to my teams in technical terms was really helpful. So again, it's that communication element.
Kind of thing.
And I really enjoyed it. Particularly the sort of hard technical side, because it was always interesting. It really was, new developments and mainframe and open system and all sorts. And because my boss of the time, again, gave me an opportunity that I just immediately said yes to, I then ended up doing a lot of public speaking and conferencing all over the world, which again, I so enjoyed. I liked writing the papers. I liked being on a stage and delivering them. I loved the travel. I loved all of the people that I could connect with and the organisations that I could connect with. And it's about 20 years ago now that I started doing that. And it's since then, that's always been an element of every role that I've done, is some form of conference speaking and public speaking.
See, when I researched you and I looked at the 20 years of BT and I saw the neurodiversity and the ADHD, and my question was going to be on the podcast was how, when you're talking about procrastination and the ability to get out and actually do that mundane task and kind of get through the day.
Yeah.
But then when you're talking now, it's because you find your life interesting.
Yeah.
Like you find what was going on interesting at the time and you focus on that.
And you see the other side of it is in a big company like BT, to some extent you can get away with not doing some stuff, which of course will be really noticeable in a much smaller organisation. But because BT is so huge, the fact that I wasn't doing X or X,
as long as you get the results at the end, I have the ball.
Exactly. But I do remember, I mean, all of the time at BT, I was always a square peg in a round hole. So I had to find my niche of where I was good, and then it would work. And there would always be people who didn't understand me and who didn't understand the managers who appreciated how I worked. So I would always, in the end up in some sort of conflict with management layer somewhere because they simply weren't understanding that way that I worked at all.
How is that feeling like? Because it goes back to what you had when you were a child and through university in terms of being the outsider, that black sheep.
I changed role a couple of times. In fact, when I moved from the IT division, it was in a reaction to that feeling of almost being bullied by the management layer above me, and being promised a role and then having it taken away because this little subset had said, no, well, we don't get why you think she's so good. And I moved myself, I actively went and sought out a different part of the organisation and said, I need to move. Do you want me? There wasn't even a role, and they made a role for me because they knew that my skills would be good.
Where like you met resistance, and then instead of hitting that, because what I would do, because I'm like, I don't know what the word is, but I'm kind of like a bit of a hothead in that sense. Like if I get resistance, I kind of match it, and I just end up fighting someone or like clashing. Whereas you look at the resistance and you see that pathway, and then instead of facing, you go around it. Exactly.
Absolutely.
So then,
and sometimes it's a good thing, sometimes it's not a good thing. But in the main, because I tend to try and avoid confrontation if I can. That is quite often what I will do. One of the things that
but there's avoiding confrontation, and then there's actually finding a way around it. There's two different things.
Those people that had been effectively bullying me were still there with their bullying behaviour. So there's a part of me that knows that there were probably better ways to deal with that. But at the time, it had gone on for so long that I needed to not be in that anymore. And so, it was sometimes it's a reaction rather than a response, and a response is better because it means you've considered it. But sometimes you've let things go for so long that in the end it's the reaction of just, I need to be out of here, and that's what I'm going to do.
But just follow me for a second while I explain this point. But when you're on about procrastination in terms of the mundane tasks, but then when it comes to, what was the word? The neurotypical people. So I think myself maybe, it's, well, I get with a lot of people, with my brothers, and what I see around me is when they meet that resistance or they have something, they procrastinate in terms of their next action. So they'll just stay in the same position because they're too scared, and like they start overthinking, or like, oh, if I make the jump here, this will happen, this will happen. If I stay here, if I clash with him, this or her or whoever, this will happen, other things will happen, whatever. Then they just stay in the same position. Or they'll meet, clash, and they clash, but then when it comes to neuro different people, whatever the wording is, I'm sorry if I get it wrong, but I'm trying to work it out. But what you do is, instead of you procrastinate with other things, but then when it comes to your ambitions and what actually drives you, your fearlessness takes you further.
Yes.
Because obviously we can see from your story, instead of whenever you meet the resistance, you just go around it, or you find an avenue and you keep knocking on that door till it comes down. So don't you think we're all neurotypical in a way, in terms of like, I have my positives and differences and you also have yours, but if you maximize whatever your outputs are and whatever you're good at, you'll actually get something.
It's a spectrum.
Exactly.
It really is. From profoundly autistic, for instance. So my brother that I mentioned is, he's non-verbal.
Okay.
He'll never be able to live independently. He'll never be able to work in any concrete sense. But, you know, that's on the very far end of that scale.
Yeah.
And then you go all the way up to, as you said, the neurotypical population. But it is... The point I always try and come back to people when trying to talk about neurodiversity and neurodifference is that you have to remember at some point our brains are different. They actually physically are different. And for instance, great example of this is why medication works for some people with ADHD, for instance. That medication is speed. It's amphetamines.
Okay.
So if you gave a neurotypical person speed, it's going to speed them up because that's why it's called. I take amphetamines every morning.
Okay.
It doesn't speed me up because my brain chemistry and my brain construction is different. It works in a different way. And what it actually does is it gives me focus and clarity that I don't normally have. And it gives me the headspace to make better decisions. It makes me less impulsive. And that means...
Does it kind of blur out the noise, if you know what I mean?
It doesn't, for most people, it doesn't take away that element of being distracted, which is a very classic ADHD thing. You would flip from one thing to another. So it is usually about that focus and clarity and the impulsivity, which can cause a lot of problems. And it impacts everybody differently. Not everybody gets on with the medication, but that's how you can see that it's actually a physical neurological difference, because if you gave that same drug to somebody,
it works.
It will have its intended effect of speeding them up as opposed to slowing us down, which is what it does for somebody with ADHD. So you've got to remember it's not just behavioural. There is a physical difference in the brain. No,
but obviously the physical and the behavioural is they work kind of the same, like in terms of the impact. But then when you're taking, like, just as a question, like I'm sorry if I'm being offensive, or just let me know.
No. I was going to say you can ask me anything genuinely.
Because the way I deliver it might not be the best, but it's my intentions. But I'm just trying to get it out basically. But what I'm trying to say is when you're taking the drugs and the I can't say the word
amphetamines.
Amphetamines, yeah. So when you're taking those, doesn't it kind of inhibit like your actual impulsiveness? Because I feel like your impulsiveness is a good thing in terms of your career and what you actually achieved. So how is it kind of balancing that out, if you go on?
Some of that is always going to be personality driven. So it will stop it in the sense of I spend less money. So I'm an impulsive spending, it's a horrendous thing. So I make better decisions around that. I drink less alcohol because that's an impulsive, I'll have another one.
Just keep going.
So it makes it much easier to do the things that you know that you ought to be doing in order to be either healthy or financially sensible or anything else. If I was making career decisions, then all it will enable me to do is actually, as I said earlier, respond rather than react. So it doesn't take away my lack of risk aversion. So I'm still going to make the same decision. I just actually will have thought about it more and possibly thought about the implications more. I'm still going to say yes. I'll just be going into it far more prepared.
So that makes more sense. I understand that. So then talk to me about the transition, like from obviously first you started as you said on the phone calls and the call center, place agent basically, and then to a director. So obviously you had 4 promotions, 4 years, but then after that to that, and then why leave?
So in the end, we had the big IT bit. So I was in IT for about 10 years, and then I came out with that bullying situation, and I did 3 years in internal audit, where I learned a lot. But I'm not a natural auditor, so I don't tend to deal very well at a very detailed level. And of course, a lot of auditing is let's check that, let's check that, let's check that. What I do is, and again, with hindsight, classic ADHD, I see big picture stuff. And so I can connect patterns and go, right, okay, I've seen this, this is wrong, this big thing is wrong, rather than all the little stuff underneath.
Yeah.
So it was an interesting time in audit, but not really a natural place for me to be. So I was already getting a bit twitchy and right, okay, what looks like it's coming next? And I put myself in the position of getting a secondment to go and set up what became Engage for Success. So it used loads of the skills that I'd built up at that point. And BT, it was quite common for those of us in the talent pool to get a secondment like that into an external organisation, so that it's obviously expanding our breadth of knowledge and experience. And BT let me do that for 2 years to go and set up and run Engage for Success in its sort of startup phase. So Engage for Success is the UK's movement for employee engagement. And we always envisaged it as a social movement, of bringing people and organisations together to share the great practice around leadership. And all of it is around how we are more effective in the workplace, and what do we need leaders to do, what do we need organisations to do, what do we do as employees to make sure that we are in the best working environment for us. So, I mean, obviously a fabulous organisation in terms of what it was trying to deliver, and incredible experience for me, having been with BT for almost 20 years by that point, to come out and do something completely different. And I hadn't realised how institutionalized I was into the BT world.
The fabric.
Yeah. And the first 6 months of that secondment, I found really difficult in terms of anxiety, because it was just so alien to what I'd been doing. And all of a sudden, I was in a tiny team where, of course, everything you did mattered.
Yeah.
And if I did procrastinate about something, it was really obvious, right from the moment. And obviously, luckily, from my point of view, I was hugely interested and motivated by it. So I didn't actually procrastinate an awful lot within that, because I was loving what I was doing. I was engaged. I really was so engaged in what we were doing. And so, of course, it brought out all of the good stuff around how I would be at work on my best day. So I was engaged. It was about people. I was able to do a whole load of different things. I was using all of the skills that I'd built up to that point of, obviously 20 years, more than 20 years in a workplace. And it had got national impact, and I like that. I like to do things that are big in that sense.
When you say national impact, talk to me a bit about that. So what was the actual national impact?
So it was actually, we were launched from Number 10 by David Cameron. It was a national task force to deliver more engagement and raise awareness about how important engagement was in business. So 42 of the top CEOs, head of the NHS, I mean, loads of proper business leaders at that very top level. So we were launched by David Cameron, and one of my first tasks was actually to establish a national network of regional groups. So I spent the first 12 months managing the task force and setting up a national network. A huge impact in those terms, and the UK leading the way with this as well. It's still not been replicated in that form anywhere else, although some countries have got closer towards something like it, but something that was so clearly supported across the government at the time as well. It was a cross-party initiative, so it wasn't just the Tories or the coalition government at the time. It was completely supported everywhere as being absolutely vital to productivity in this country.
Is there ever burnout? Because we're talking about productivity then, is that you, as you said, you were fascinated and you were invigorated by the whole idea of leading this task force and doing big things and engagement for success and taking it forward. But then if you got that drive every single day, especially with how your brain's kind of wired, it takes you to the next level. Like it goes from what I'd normally be at 75% capacity, but you'd be at 100%, 110%, 120%. So is there ever a time where like it just gets too much and your body just kind of just burns out, or does that ever happen?
Yeah, it has happened to me on occasion, but usually when I'm in a work situation where I'm unhappy as opposed to one where I'm happy. So it will be more around I'm horribly bored, this is going horribly wrong, I don't feel engaged by it. So I'm more likely to have problems like that when I'm in that state than when I'm operating at 100 miles an hour. To some extent, you have to then factor in the fact that obviously by the time I'm doing that, I'm mid-40s. I've got a much better understanding, even regardless of not knowing about the ADHD at that point, of just how to manage me as a person, which I certainly didn't have when I was younger. And so, and I've got more going on in my life because I've got a new partner by that point, and obviously I've got my son, and I've got other things that I'm interested in, and friendship group and whatever else. So I'm quite good at actually balancing out that I can get focused on something like the work for a while, but then I will come back out of it and go and do the things that energize me generally. And there's always times in our life when we just have so much stuff going on that it makes it quite difficult to do that re-energizing piece. But I'm pretty good these days at spotting when I'm likely to be in that position, and sometimes you just have to stop. And that's part of learning how to be a good leader, because you need to see that for your staff,
and for yourself as well.
You're the role model. If you're constantly working at 8 o'clock at night or across the weekends, they can see that, and you're setting an appalling example for actually how an organisation should be led.
Plus, it leads to negative behaviours because you get a bit more stroppy, a bit more irritable, and like you just end up just shouting at everyone and just bringing the whole morale down.
Yeah, exactly. And so no, I'm pretty good about not being in that state now. So I know to enjoy that feeling of focus when it's there, and but not let it consume everything. Or if it does, it's for short periods of time.
But see that's the fundamental skill to entrepreneurship. In terms of, it's not about your delivery and like what you actually do. It's about managing your mindset and your balance to actually maximize your impact going forward. So then talk to me about your work with ISC. That's entrepreneurship in itself.
It is. So ISC, we are the Initiative for Social Entrepreneurs. So everything we do is around entrepreneurship, particularly in that social enterprise, social economy space. And we're a Birmingham organisation. We've worked across the West Midlands. We've worked across the country. We've even worked internationally. So we're about 22 years old. So I got this job just over a year ago. A bit like when I got pregnant, within a couple of weeks of getting it was when the ADHD thing came along. So when I applied for the job and when I was awarded the job, I didn't know about it. So that was an interesting conversation with my board to say, I know you don't know me very well, however, this big thing has happened. But again, they were phenomenally supportive and still are. Which is obviously always a nice place to be. And I was so excited by the role and the organisation because I'd had a really bad spell before that through the pandemic where I'd spent the first 9 months of it unemployed, and I'd spent the next 9 months of it working minimum wage shifts in a warehouse to make ends meet because I'll do anything. I was applying for everything, couldn't get a job. Warehouse said, yes, fine, I'll go and work in a warehouse, at least it'll pay the mortgage. And that was a challenge. But so brilliant, dream job, chief exec, Initiative for Social Entrepreneurs.
And then boom.
But ADHD. Okay. But of course, what it's done is made me both actually research, but also realise how prevalent neurodiversity is within the entrepreneurial population. So it's actually, some research studies say about 40% of the entrepreneurial population actually have some form of neurodiversity. And we've ended up running our own businesses or setting them up or whatever it is that we're doing because we don't fit in standard workplaces. So that whole square peg, round hole thing, so that's very common. We don't deal terribly well with authority sometimes. And so again, we come out of traditional workplaces and we set up our own things. We can be hugely passionate and focused about a cause or a product or a service or whatever it is. So of course we're very focused then on that entrepreneurial spirit of getting stuff done. And so that's been interesting for me to look at how we perhaps change what the Initiative for Social Entrepreneurs delivers when we're delivering. So we do a big startup program, for instance, called The Fuse, which many social enterprises in Birmingham, the West Midlands, will have started from. How do we review that so that actually that fits better with what we now know about the people that are likely to be with us? What are learning styles like for autistic people or dyslexic people or ADHD people as opposed to a neurotypical population? How do we help businesses scale up? How do we help them grow? And all of the stuff around community-based connection, which sits very closely to me. So, when you're a social enterprise, you really want to be a part of an ecosystem. Because you're going to be, you don't want to just be operating on your own. You want to be being helped by the other organisations that are around you, particularly the ones that are similarly driven by social justice and social values. And so ISE, we do a lot of that. We run the social economy networks, and we, with a big bunch of stakeholders like the council and the combined authority and other entrepreneurial places like the School for Social Entrepreneurs, we run Birmingham as a social enterprise city, for instance, and that brings all of those social economy organisations together. And so there's a lot of people in Birmingham and the West Midlands and wider who are very focused on growing that social economy in a sustainable way, and bringing those social entrepreneurs together to do all sorts, really. I mean, some of it's share knowledge, some of it's actually build organisations together, some of it's what are the opportunities, you do this, I do this, let's bring that together, we can perhaps bid for this service or this contract or this tender. So we do a lot of that, connecting people together, giving them the knowledge to run better businesses, essentially.
So give me, just because I've been to a couple of these events, but for people that haven't, that initial step in terms of getting into contact with ISE, and then also the kind of program it would kind of be to kind of help them.
Yeah, absolutely.
Just on a basis.
So if you're already in that space, perhaps you're running your own social enterprise or a socially focused business, then the best place to come and look is either on our social media. So you'll find us on Instagram, you'll find us on Twitter, you'll find us on Facebook. There is a website which is getting a facelift very soon, so I almost feel like I should apologise for it. It's a bit outdated, but you can find us in those places, and you can then sign up newsletter. So we will tell you when the networking events are going to be, and you will know the networking events. We try and find interesting places to do them. We were at the Steam House down by Aston University recently, and it's a real mix of organisations that will come to those. So, and part of it is to get you all talking to each other, and quite often really interesting collaborations will come from those networking meetings, and we obviously try and make sure that anybody coming to it is being updated then about things which impact the social economy within our area of, broadly speaking, the West Midlands. If you are thinking about starting up a social enterprise, or you want business support in some way, then all of our programs you can find there as well. So we're recruiting at the moment, for instance, for our startup program for Fuse. If you've got an idea which is in the health and social care space, and that will be starting in October. So we're recruiting now, and that's an 8-week course with quite a considerable amount of follow-up after that as well. So you remain a sort of an active part of that Fuse programme for a total of about 6 months in terms of support from us and a peer network, and all of that learning and knowledge for all of those building blocks that you need to start up your social enterprise. And if we don't have a startup programme running on a timescale that suits you, we also now do Social Enterprise in a Box. So that's a course that you can come on with us that we will help you through the registration that you have to do to legally set up your social enterprise. And then obviously we can provide other bits and pieces that will help you just get those first steps going, and then you will fit in then to one of our other courses or one of our other programs, depending on your timescale. So we can get you going in a number of ways. And obviously we can also, with the Growth Hub here and the local enterprise partnerships, we work with existing organisations to help them grow. So we can look at your business plans, we can look at your marketing, we can help you do marketing analysis. Business support is what we do.
So then, just to round off the podcast, what advice would you give, especially as a person coming from an environment where they've experienced neurodiversity and severe ADHD, as you've said, from obviously not being aware of it, but from a young age, you've kind of had to carry that through. What advice would you give to any young person or any person really that may have similar symptoms or going through something similar, but maybe are diagnosed with it or haven't been diagnosed, but what kind of advice can you give to kind of push through and carry on and keep going forward?
Yeah, it's a lot of it is around believing in yourself, and it's very easy for us to absorb those negative messages, and if anything I've been saying about my own experience is ringing bells for you, then go and do a little bit of research. So I hesitate to say books, because particularly if you've got ADHD, many of us can't actually manage the focus to read one. But there are some really good YouTube channels. How to ADHD is one I always recommend. And that's where I saw that first video that gave me all of the bells or whatever. Is just go and check it out, and you will find that there are screening tests online all over the place that will give you an indication if this is something that and not even just for young people. So obviously I was 53 and I am absolutely textbook ADHD. I really am. I mean, I'm genuinely still quite surprised that nobody spotted it. And procrastination we've talked about a lot, and I know it's because it's the symptom that gives me the most damage, I suppose, in a way. And so if that's ringing bells for you, if that feeling of procrastination about everything all the time, then don't read books and articles about procrastination. Go and read the ones about ADHD, because I would lay some fairly serious odds that if that's what you're experiencing, that's probably what it is.
And also as well, looking at your story just from talking to you today as being the third person and third eye, is for what I see with you is fearlessness and also maximizing your output. So it doesn't matter, because we all got positive and negatives, and there are things that are good and or bad about us, but it's about maximizing the things that are good about us. So when it comes to you,
celebrate our difference. Celebrate our, when I was 17, I used to wear the most ridiculous clothes. There are photographs of me. I mean, honestly, hilarious. But I loved being different. The world hadn't yet taught me that it's not always seen as a good thing. And since my diagnosis last year, I'm now much more back celebrating me in all my blue hair, science fiction, Star Trek geekiness, all of that stuff. I got visible tattoos, the whole thing. And I'm much more comfortable being me again than I've been for a long time. And it is about that. It's celebrate your own difference.
Yeah, I think that's a great ending to the podcast. Thank you for coming on.
My pleasure.
Cheers.